They developed 98 houses on my land. Not by accident, on purpose. I inherited 47 acres from my grandfather, paid off pristine farmland, living there peacefully until these criminals built their McMansions right on top of my property. Paved driveways, street lights, families living in houses that belonged to me. The HOA president, Veronica Ashford, blonde bob, white Escalade, authority complex bigger than her fake smile, called me rural poverty threatening property values. Said her husband's bullshit surveys proved my boundaries were wrong, so their $35 million empire was perfectly legal. Wrong, bitch. Here's what I did. Absolutely nothing. Let them finish. Install pools. Host their arrogant victory festival. Then I walked up to their podium with the county survey showing my boundary cuts through every home and watched their empire burn on live television. What would you do if a criminals built a neighborhood on your property? Let me back up and tell you how this nightmare started. Because understanding Veronica Ashford requires understanding what she was trying to escape. My name's Ezra Blackwood, and I'm what folks around here call old school stubborn. 52 years old, spent 30 years fixing diesel engines at Murphy's garage until my grandfather passed and left me his 47-acre farm outside Millbrook County. Nothing fancy, just a 1940s farmhouse with hardwood floors that creaked like old bones, a chicken coop older than the interstate, and vegetable gardens that had fed 3 generations of Blackwoods through good times and lean. The smell of bacon grease and fresh coffee still hung in my kitchen every morning, same as it did when Grandpa was alive. My calloused hands still turned the same cast iron skillet he'd used, still pumped the same well water from the hand pump beside the back door. Some mornings, spreading feed for my chickens while morning mist rose off the pasture, I could almost hear his voice carried on the wind. My wife Martha works at the elementary school library, organizing reading programs and helping kids discover worlds beyond our small county. She's got honey-colored hair going silver at the temples and the kind of gentle wisdom that makes troubled children trust her instantly. Our 2 kids moved to Atlanta and Charlotte after college, constantly sending us articles about downsizing for seniors and retirement community benefits. They love us fiercely but think we're crazy for staying put in what they call the middle of nowhere. Here's what my kids don't understand. This isn't nowhere. This is the place where my great-grandfather cleared stumps with a mule and a chain. Where my grandfather survived the Depression by growing everything the family ate. Where I learned to drive on tractor paths and caught fireflies in mason jars every summer evening. I'd been paying property taxes on every square foot for 8 years since inheriting the place, but I'd never bothered getting it professionally surveyed. Why would I? The old fence posts looked right, the gravel driveway was where it always was, and nobody ever questioned anything. Then, Veronica Ashford moved to town like a hurricane wearing designer yoga pants. Picture everything you hate about HOA dictators concentrated into one perfectly manicured package. Blonde bob that defied both gravity and wind, arms toned from expensive Pilates classes, and a white Cadillac Escalade with vanity plates reading Rules 1 parked in her circular driveway like a monument to suburban authority. She and her husband Sterling had moved here from Orange County 8 years ago with ambitious plans to elevate our sleepy rural area. Sterling owned Ashford Communities LLC, one of those development companies that turns family farms into subdivisions with fake rustic names like Heritage Meadows and Whispering Oak Estates, places that never had a meadow or oak tree until they planted them around the sales office. Veronica immediately got herself elected HOA president of their first development, then began expanding her influence like kudzu on a fence row. City council meetings, planning commission hearings, school board sessions, anywhere there was a microphone and an opportunity to tell other people how to live their lives. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning in September that dawned clear and crisp, with autumn leaves just beginning to turn. I was in my kitchen, bacon popping and sizzling in Grandpa's cast iron skillet, coffee percolating on the old gas stove, when the unmistakable crunch of multiple vehicles on gravel announced unwelcome visitors. Through my kitchen window, past Martha's herb garden, I watched Veronica's gleaming Escalade pull up, followed by a sheriff's deputy cruiser. The contrast was jarring. Polished suburban authority meeting rural practicality in my farmyard, where chickens scattered from the unfamiliar vehicles. Veronica climbed out wearing stiletto heels that had no earthly business on a working farm, each step across my gravel sounding like rifle shots in the morning stillness. The deputy looked embarrassed to be there, hat in his hands, clearly wishing he was anywhere else than serving papers for an HOA dispute. "Mr. Blackwood?" Veronica's voice had that fake sweet tone that immediately raised my hackles, like saccharin, trying to mask poison. And that's when my real education in suburban warfare began. Veronica thrust a thick folder of documents at me with the ceremonial flourish of someone serving a death warrant. The papers smelled like expensive copy toner and legal intimidation. HOA bylaws, freshly printed and highlighted in aggressive yellow marker, with sections about property setbacks and agricultural restrictions in residential zones. According to her interpretation, my chicken coop violated some 15-foot setback requirement and posed a significant health hazard to the surrounding community. The violation notice demanded immediate removal within 48 hours, plus a $2,500 fine that would make my monthly grocery budget look like pocket change. "Lady," I said, trying to keep my voice level while my blood pressure climbed toward dangerous territory, "I've had chickens on this land since before you knew this state existed. That coop was built by my grandfather in 1956, back when this whole area was nothing but farmland and good sense." Her smile could have frozen August sunshine. "Mr. Blackwood, I understand rural areas have different standards, but we simply cannot allow poverty aesthetics to override modern property requirements. The health department is very concerned about disease vectors so close to family homes." The deputy shuffled his boots against my gravel, clearly uncomfortable. "Ma'am, I'm just here to serve the official notice. This is a civil matter between you and the homeowners association." I looked at those papers, feeling something cold and hard settling in my stomach. The legal address matched my property, but the boundary descriptions felt wrong somehow, like a song played in the wrong key. These weren't the same fence lines my grandfather had shown me as a boy. 2 weeks later, when my surveyor's report arrived in the mail, I understood why those boundaries felt wrong. They were completely fabricated. But Veronica didn't know that yet. In fact, she was escalating her harassment campaign with the methodical precision of a general planning a siege. The morning after I filed my survey request with Morrison Land Surveying, Veronica appeared at the county courthouse with a restraining order petition, not against some violent criminal or dangerous stalker, against me, a farmer who'd never raised his voice to anyone except his tractor when it refused to start on cold mornings. Her sworn affidavit read like fiction written by a paranoid screenplay writer. I was allegedly threatening property values through frivolous boundary disputes and harassing innocent homeowners with baseless legal intimidation. She painted herself as a concerned citizen protecting vulnerable families from an unstable neighbor with a history of confrontational behavior. Then came the digital assassination campaign. Veronica flooded every local social media platform with posts about my increasingly erratic behavior. She shared Ring doorbell footage of me, walking along my own fence line to check surveyor's markers, and spun it into a narrative about suspicious individuals lurking near children's play areas and potential threats to community safety. The smell of fresh mulch and mounting hysteria was thick in the air during her emergency HOA meeting that Thursday evening. 43 homeowners packed into the Willowbrook Community Center, most of them young families who'd stretched their budgets to buy their first homes in what they believed was a safe, family-friendly neighborhood. Veronica had prepared her presentation with the thoroughness of a prosecutor building a capital case. She displayed blown-up photographs of me menacing neighborhood children, actually just me checking my property corners where kids happened to be riding bikes on the sidewalk. She played audio recordings of General Patton, my rooster, crowing at dawn, calling it intentional noise harassment designed to disrupt family sleep schedules. "This individual," she declared, pointing at an enlarged photo of me holding Frank Morrison's surveying equipment, "is systematically attempting to destroy everything we've worked to build here. Our property values, our children's safety, our fundamental right to peaceful enjoyment of our homes." The crowd responded like a congregation receiving revelation. 3 homeowners immediately volunteered to file formal noise complaints with the county. 2 others offered to install security cameras pointed directly at my property to document illegal activities. The meeting concluded with a unanimous vote to petition the county for immediate reclassification of the entire area as residential only, which would ban agricultural activities and force me to remove chickens my family had kept for 67 years. But here's what Veronica's righteous fury was hiding. While she was busy orchestrating her public relations campaign, I was uncovering evidence that would incinerate her entire world. Frank Morrison, my surveyor, was a meticulous professional who'd been mapping properties for 30 years. When he spread the official county survey maps across my kitchen table, his weathered finger tracing boundary lines with surgical precision, what he showed me defied belief. "Ezra," he said, shaking his gray head in professional amazement, "the GPS coordinates Sterling used for his subdivision plat are off by 847 feet. 847 feet, son. That's not a mistake. That's either incompetence so massive it should be criminal, or fraud so brazen it takes your breath away." I stared at those maps until the property lines burned into my vision. I legally owned portions of 98 homes, foundations, septic systems, driveways, even half of their precious main entrance road. Sterling Ashford had built a $35 million subdivision on land he didn't own, and now it was time for Veronica to learn exactly what property rights really meant. Linda Hayes, the real estate attorney Frank Morrison recommended, took one look at my survey documentation and let out a low whistle that could have summoned dogs from 3 counties over. "Ezra," she said, spreading the maps across her mahogany conference table like a general planning a campaign, "this is either the most expensive surveying mistake in county history, or we're looking at deliberate fraud on a scale that would make Bernie Madoff proud." But while I was learning the legal implications of boundary fraud, Veronica Ashford was transforming her harassment campaign into psychological warfare that would have impressed Cold War intelligence operatives. She hired a private investigator, a greasy little man named Dale Hutchins, who drove an unmarked sedan and wore cheap cologne that smelled like desperation mixed with aftershave. Dale started following Martha to work every morning, parking in the elementary school lot with a telephoto lens like some discount paparazzi stalking celebrities. He photographed our mail delivery, documented our grocery shopping trips, and asked neighbors leading questions about our financial difficulties and recent behavioral changes. The man actually went through our garbage, probably looking for evidence of alcoholism, drug use, or unpaid bills he could use to discredit us. Martha came home shaking one afternoon after Dale approached her in the library parking lot, claiming to be a concerned community member asking about my mental health episodes and whether I'd ever displayed violent tendencies toward authority figures. Then Veronica escalated to filing false police reports with the creative storytelling ability of a fiction writer. She claimed I'd threatened her with a dangerous agricultural implement during our property dispute. When Officer Bradley Morrison, Frank's nephew as it happened, came to investigate, I showed him the terrifying weapon, a standard garden rake I'd been using to level gravel in my driveway. "Mr. Blackwood," Officer Morrison said, fighting to keep a straight face, "I have to file the official report because she made the complaint. But between you and me, Mrs. Ashford calls our dispatch twice a week about different neighbors. Last month, she reported Mrs. Patterson for hanging laundry on Sunday, claiming it violated community standards of Sunday observance." Veronica's strategic masterpiece was convincing the city council to fast-track an emergency ordinance requiring professional property surveys for all parcels over 5 acres. The filing fee? $2,500, due within 30 days, or face immediate citation and escalating daily fines. It was brilliant, really. She figured I couldn't afford a second survey, and the ordinance would force me to prove my boundaries were legitimate while she spread public doubt about my surveyor's competence and my mental stability. What Veronica didn't know was that Frank Morrison's deeper investigation had uncovered something that made my boundary dispute look like a parking ticket compared to federal prison. Sterling's development wasn't just built on the wrong property. It was constructed on illegally filled wetlands protected by federal environmental law. Frank spread historical maps across my kitchen table, pointing to blue-shaded areas that told a story of deliberate environmental destruction. "Ezra, your grandfather's farm always included a seasonal marsh that supported migrating waterfowl. Every spring, thousands of ducks and geese would rest here during their journey north." The maps showed what Sterling had done with crystal clarity. He'd simply buried the wetlands under tons of concrete and fill dirt, then built houses on top without obtaining required federal permits from the Environmental Protection Agency. "This isn't just boundary fraud anymore," Frank explained, his voice carrying the weight of someone who understood the legal implications. "This is federal environmental crime territory. The EPA doesn't negotiate, and they don't accept local corruption as an excuse." Frank's investigation revealed Sterling's pattern of cutting corners to maximize profits. He'd used unlicensed electrical contractors whose work didn't meet code requirements. He'd installed septic systems with substandard materials that were already failing in ways homeowners were quietly dealing with rather than admit they'd bought defective properties. 3 houses showed foundation cracks from settling on improperly compacted fill. 5 more had septic backup problems that created health hazards. Sterling's insurance specifically excluded coverage for. Meanwhile, Veronica intensified her legal intimidation campaign. Sterling's corporate attorneys sent me a 47-page cease and desist letter that read like a legal novel written in a foreign language designed to terrify simple farmers into submission. They demanded I stop clouding title with frivolous claims and threatened to sue me for $2.3 million in damages for tortious interference with business relations and intentional infliction of emotional distress on homeowners. The letter concluded with demands that I publicly retract my boundary claims, pay their legal fees, and sign a statement acknowledging Sterling's legitimate property ownership throughout Willowbrook Estates. Instead of retreating, I escalated right back with the nuclear option Frank Morrison had helped me discover. I filed formal complaints with the Environmental Protection Agency, the State Environmental Protection Division, and the County Health Department, submitting Frank's evidence of Sterling's federal wetlands violations, substandard construction practices, and septic systems that were contaminating groundwater. Then I contacted Sarah Sage, Channel 7's investigative reporter who'd built her career exposing municipal corruption and developer fraud in rural counties across the state. Sarah had the kind of sharp intelligence that could dissect complex financial fraud and explain it in terms ordinary viewers could understand. When I showed her Frank's survey evidence and environmental documentation, her eyes lit up like Christmas morning. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, already planning her investigation, "this is exactly the kind of story our viewers need to see. Would you mind if I brought a camera crew to document those foundation cracks and septic problems?" But Veronica had cards left to play, and she was about to show me just how vicious suburban warfare could become. November arrived with the kind of bitter cold that makes old farmhouses creak and groan like arthritic bones, and Veronica Ashford's desperation grew more dangerous with each dropping degree. She organized something she called the Willowbrook Family Safety Patrol, a group of neighborhood parents who took rotating shifts monitoring my daily activities like I was operating a methamphetamine laboratory instead of raising chickens and growing tomatoes. These suburban sentinels photographed me feeding General Patton at dawn, documented my trips to check the mailbox, and maintained detailed logs of what they termed my suspicious behavioral patterns. They shared their intelligence through a private Facebook group called Protecting Our Children, where parents posted grainy cell phone videos of me performing such threatening activities as repairing fence posts and harvesting late-season vegetables. The smell of wood smoke from my fireplace and mounting hysteria hung in the autumn air like competing perfumes as Veronica escalated her campaign to destroy Martha's reputation at work. She convinced Dr. Patricia Hawkins, a local child psychologist, to write a letter to the school board expressing professional concerns about Martha's ability to work effectively with children while dealing with her husband's documented aggressive behavior toward community authorities. 3 different parents suddenly complained that Martha seemed distracted and unprofessional during library story time, claiming she'd made inappropriate comments about standing up to bullies that made their children uncomfortable. The fire marshal arrived unannounced on a Tuesday morning, citing my 40-year-old burn pile as a hazardous fire risk requiring immediate extinguishment and proper permitting. The permit application fee was $1,200, and approval could take up to 6 months, effectively ending my ability to clear brush and fallen branches the way my grandfather had taught me. Veronica's cruelest masterstroke was staging property damage throughout Willowbrook, then photographing the evidence for her social media prosecution case. Broken mailbox posts, suspicious tire ruts in manicured lawns, and damaged landscaping appeared overnight, followed by posts claiming, "This is what happens when agricultural extremists target innocent families." Pastor Williams at Millbrook Methodist, a man I'd known for 15 years, called to suggest that Martha and I might find worship more comfortable at a different congregation until our legal difficulties were resolved. Apparently, several prominent church members had expressed concerns about our disruptive influence on Christian fellowship. But Sterling was fighting his own war on the financial front, and his desperation was becoming visible to anyone paying attention. Sarah Sage's investigation had discovered Sterling's intricate web of shell companies and fraudulent financing that made his boundary theft look like petty crime. He'd used my land as collateral for construction loans without owning it, violated federal banking regulations, and created a house of cards that was collapsing faster than he could prop it up. Sterling offered to settle our boundary dispute by purchasing my entire farm for 40% below market value. Generous of him, considering he thought he already owned most of it legally. When I politely declined his lowball offer, my property tax assessment mysteriously tripled overnight, supposedly due to improved access to municipal services I'd never requested and actively opposed. An anonymous tip triggered an IRS audit of my small engine repair side business, questioning whether I was properly reporting income from fixing neighbors' lawnmowers, chainsaws, and garden tillers. The audit would cost me thousands in accounting fees even if they found nothing wrong. My homeowner's insurance company canceled my policy, citing increased liability risks associated with ongoing legal disputes in the area. Replacement coverage would cost 4 times as much, assuming I could find a company willing to insure what they termed a problematic property. But I was building my own arsenal of evidence that would obliterate both Sterling and Veronica more thoroughly than they could imagine. Patricia Santos, the environmental law clinic attorney, introduced me to federal investigators who'd been tracking Sterling's criminal activities across multiple states. EPA Special Agent Maria Rodriguez had been building a case against Sterling's environmental crimes for 8 months, ever since his Colorado victims contacted federal authorities about his pattern of wetlands destruction and investor fraud. Mr. Blackwood, Agent Rodriguez explained during our confidential meeting, Sterling Ashford isn't just a local problem. He's run the same environmental fraud scheme in Colorado, Nevada, and Arizona. He destroys protected habitats, bribes local officials to ignore violations, then moves to a new state when federal investigators get too close. The FBI Financial Crimes Unit was investigating Sterling's use of falsified survey documents to obtain fraudulent bank loans. His practice of using other people's land as collateral for construction financing constituted federal banking fraud that carried potential sentences of 20 years in prison. George Williams, the retired EPA inspector Patricia introduced me to, had spent 30 years documenting environmental crimes and knew exactly how to build cases that would survive federal court challenges. Ezra, George said while we stood in what used to be a thriving seasonal marsh, environmental criminals always think they can hide their damage by burying it. But nature keeps permanent records. Soil samples, disrupted hydrology, displaced wildlife populations. Everything tells a story that can't be faked or destroyed. 3 Willowbrook homeowners with foundation problems had quietly contacted Patricia about joining our legal action against Sterling. They'd discovered their title insurance was void due to Sterling's boundary fraud, leaving them personally liable for structural defects that could cost hundreds of thousands to repair. But I wasn't ready to spring my trap yet. Sterling and Veronica thought they were winning, and I wanted them overconfident when federal agents made their move. Sometimes the sweetest victory comes from letting your enemies defeat themselves through their own arrogance. The breakthrough came on a soggy Thursday evening in late November, when Martha was conducting what she called advanced research reconnaissance for Sarah Sage's investigative series. Martha approached problems with the methodical precision of a research librarian who'd spent 20 years helping people find information they didn't know existed. While I fixed broken machinery by intuition and experience, she attacked mysteries with systematic determination that would have impressed forensic accountants. She'd been cross-referencing Sterling's business history across multiple states when she discovered something that made her call me away from evening chores with the urgency of someone who'd found buried treasure. "Ezra," she said, her voice tight with controlled excitement, "you need to see what I found about Sterling's Colorado project." On her laptop screen was a bankruptcy filing dated March 15, 2019, Ashford Mountain Communities LLC versus Environmental Defense Coalition. Sterling owed $4.7 million to investors from a failed development called Alpine Vista Estates that had collapsed after federal investigators proved he'd illegally diverted protected stream water for golf course irrigation. But the bankruptcy filing was just the appetizer for the main course of Sterling's criminal enterprise. Martha had somehow accessed Sterling's loan documents for Willowbrook Estates. Don't ask me how. Librarians have research superpowers that defy explanation. And what she found was financial fraud on a scale that took my breath away. Sterling had used my falsified survey data to secure an $18 million construction loan from First National Bank. The loan agreement required 100% clear title to all development property. with specific clauses about environmental compliance and boundary verification. My legitimate ownership of portions of 98 houses made Sterling's entire loan immediately callable. The bank could demand full repayment within 30 days, and if Sterling couldn't pay, they could foreclose on every single property in Willowbrook Estates. "It gets worse," Martha continued, pulling up county deed records with the determination of a detective solving a cold case. "Remember when Veronica lectured you about legal requirements overriding rural traditions? Well, legal requirements work both ways. She'd discovered the original 1962 deed restrictions that governed our entire area. When my grandfather's neighbors sold land to the county for road expansion, the sale included permanent easements requiring any future subdivision to maintain agricultural buffer zones and environmental protection corridors. Sterling's development violated every single restriction. The legal language was ironclad. Any structure built in violation could be removed at the violator's expense, and every home sale was potentially voidable due to undisclosed easements. Every family in Willowbrook had unknowingly purchased homes that violated permanent deed restrictions, making their title insurance potentially worthless and their investments legally compromised. Patricia Santos confirmed our research with the grim satisfaction of a prosecutor who just found smoking gun evidence. "Ezra, this isn't just civil fraud anymore. Sterling knowingly used false information to obtain federal banking loans, violated environmental protection laws, and concealed material facts from dozens of home buyers. We're looking at RICO territory, federal racketeering charges." The FBI had been investigating Sterling for 18 months, ever since his Colorado victims filed complaints about missing investor funds and environmental fraud. Our boundary dispute was the final piece of evidence they needed to prove a criminal pattern spanning multiple states. But here's what fundamentally changed the power dynamics. I wasn't just fighting for my property rights anymore. I was holding Sterling's entire financial empire in my hands. If I demanded immediate enforcement of my boundary rights, Sterling would face bankruptcy, federal prosecution, and foreclosure that would destroy 98 families' homes and life savings. Or I could use my leverage to demand something better: fair compensation, environmental remediation, and protection for innocent homeowners who'd been victimized by Sterling's fraud just as much as I had. Martha squeezed my hand across our kitchen table, her eyes bright with the possibility of turning our nightmare into something positive. "Ezra," she said softly, "we could destroy them completely, or we could do something that actually helps people." That's when I knew exactly how this war was going to end. The next 6 weeks felt like preparing for the most complex military operation in county history, except our enemy had no idea they were about to walk into the most perfectly orchestrated ambush ever conceived by a farmer and a librarian. Patricia Santos connected me with the environmental law clinic at State University, where third-year law students approached my case with the enthusiasm of crusaders fighting environmental crime. These young lawyers possessed research skills that made Martha look like an amateur, plus the righteous energy that only comes from believing you can change the world through legal advocacy. Rebecca Kim, a brilliant student who spoke 4 languages and understood environmental law like I understood diesel engines, discovered legal precedent from Riverside County, California, where a developer's boundary fraud had invalidated financing for 247 homes. The federal court had ordered complete environmental remediation, criminal prosecution, and a victim compensation fund, exactly the blueprint we needed for Sterling's empire. "Mr. Blackwood," Rebecca explained during our strategy session, her laptop surrounded by law books that looked thick enough to stop bullets, "federal environmental violations trump local corruption every single time. When EPA and FBI work together on fraud cases, local officials who've been taking bribes develop sudden amnesia about their special relationships with developers." While the law students researched legal precedents that would destroy Sterling in federal court, I focused on gathering physical evidence so overwhelming that no corrupt official could dismiss or ignore it. Frank Morrison taught me to use professional GPS apps that could create boundary markers viewable on any smartphone. I walked every inch of my property line during those gray December mornings, dropping digital pins that would later prove exactly where my land ended and Sterling's fraud began. The technical evidence gathering became almost meditative, like morning prayers performed with surveying equipment instead of words. The smell of frost on dead grass and the sound of my boots crunching through ice-covered puddles provided soundtrack for documenting 8 years of systematic trespassing by families who had no idea they were living on stolen land. I installed motion-activated trail cameras along the true boundary lines, creating a comprehensive surveillance system that documented every violation with timestamp accuracy. Each camera captured homeowners walking their dogs, children riding bicycles, and maintenance crews mowing grass on property I legally owned. George Williams, the retired EPA inspector, taught me environmental investigation techniques that would be admissible in federal court. We collected soil samples showing contamination from Sterling's illegal septic systems, photographed disrupted wetland drainage patterns, and documented wildlife habitat destruction using methods that had withstood challenges by corporate defense attorneys. Ezra, George explained while we stood knee-deep in what used to be a seasonal marsh, environmental criminals always think time will hide their damage, but ecological disruption leaves permanent signatures that federal investigators can read like fingerprints. Martha coordinated our media strategy with Sarah Sage, timing every revelation for maximum public impact and legal effectiveness. They planned the ultimate disclosure for the monthly county commission meeting where all proceedings are recorded, broadcast on local cable access, and archived in public records. But our secret weapon was something Sterling and Veronica never saw coming. I filed a lis pendens on all 98 Willowbrook properties. A lis pendens sounds complicated, but it's actually beautifully simple. It's a legal notice that freezes property sales until boundary disputes are resolved. This prevented Sterling from quickly selling houses to escape his financial obligations while simultaneously alerting every real estate agent in the county that Willowbrook titles were legally compromised. The financial pressure on Sterling became visible to anyone paying attention. Sarah Sage discovered he'd mortgaged his personal residence twice, liquidated his retirement accounts, and borrowed against life insurance policies to fund his legal defense against multiple federal investigations. His Colorado investors had hired private attorneys to recover their missing $4.7 million, creating a second front in Sterling's legal war. Nevada authorities were investigating his previous wetlands violations there. Arizona environmental groups were demanding federal prosecution for wildlife habitat destruction. Sterling was fighting battles in 4 states while trying to maintain the facade that Willowbrook represented successful community development. Meanwhile, Veronica interpreted my apparent withdrawal from public confrontations as victory through intimidation. She'd stopped monitoring my daily activities, convinced her harassment campaign had broken my will to fight. Her confidence grew so overwhelming that she began planning what she called Sterling's Victory Celebration, a Willowbrook community festival that would demonstrate successful resolution of all legal challenges and position Sterling for expanded development projects. The festival would feature bouncy houses, food trucks, and local politicians celebrating Sterling's innovative community development model. Veronica scheduled interviews with regional media about protecting family neighborhoods from agricultural extremism and successful public-private partnerships. Perfect. They were planning to hold their celebration directly on my property, in front of hundreds of witnesses with media present to document everything. Patricia Santos coordinated with federal investigators to time their evidence presentation with Sterling's public victory celebration. EPA agents and FBI financial crime specialists would attend the festival as concerned citizens interested in environmental protection and community development. County commissioners would be present to award Sterling a Community Excellence Recognition. Local newspaper photographers would capture every moment of what Sterling believed would be his greatest professional triumph. Sarah Sage would broadcast live coverage of the successful community celebration that would become the most spectacular public downfall in county history. I spent the final weeks practicing my festival speech in the barn, with General Patton providing moral support and editorial commentary. That rooster seemed to understand something momentous was approaching. His morning crows had become longer and more triumphant, as if he was warming up for his own moment of vindication. 3 days before the festival, I was ready to spring the trap that would change everything. Sterling Ashford was hemorrhaging money faster than a ruptured oil pipeline, and desperate men with federal investigators closing in make increasingly dangerous choices. 3 weeks before his planned victory festival, Sterling hired what he euphemistically called a property maintenance crew to address my unauthorized surveying equipment. These weren't maintenance workers. They were muscle disguised as contractors, men with prison tattoos and hostile eyes who showed up at dawn with a backhoe to remove boundary markers that had been placed by licensed professionals. I watched from my kitchen window, steam rising from my coffee mug in the December cold. while they systematically destroyed thousands of dollars worth of legitimate survey work. Each survey stake pulled from frozen ground represented Frank Morrison's meticulous measurements, GPS coordinates verified through county records, and legal documentation that proved Sterling's fraud. My trail cameras recorded every moment from multiple angles, capturing faces, license plates, and equipment serial numbers that would later connect Sterling to deliberate destruction of evidence in a federal investigation. Then Sterling escalated to environmental sabotage that crossed into federal crime territory. His construction crew accidentally spilled diesel fuel within 50 feet of my wellhead while supposedly performing routine equipment maintenance. The contamination was sophisticated, not enough to poison us immediately, but sufficient to make our water taste like we were drinking from a gas station puddle and create long-term health risks that could justify massive civil damages. George Williams tested the water within hours, using EPA-approved methods that would be admissible in federal court. The contamination pattern proved deliberate placement rather than accidental spillage, with diesel fuel concentrations that violated federal drinking water standards. Ezra, George said grimly while reviewing the laboratory results, "This isn't construction negligence. Someone deliberately poisoned your drinking water. That's federal environmental crime with serious prison time attached." The county road department suddenly decided my access road required emergency infrastructure repairs, dumping construction debris across my driveway entrance the day before I was scheduled to meet with EPA investigators. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. Someone with inside information was trying to prevent federal agents from accessing my property. Sterling's lawyers launched a legal blitz designed to bankrupt me before I could present evidence to federal prosecutors. They filed simultaneous lawsuits claiming my surveying equipment had damaged underground utilities, disrupted mail delivery, created traffic hazards, and violated county ordinances regarding agricultural equipment operation in residential zones. Each frivolous lawsuit required hiring attorneys to defend against claims that would ultimately be dismissed, but the legal fees were designed to exhaust my financial resources before federal investigators could complete their work. Veronica's psychological warfare reached levels of sophistication that would have impressed intelligence operatives specializing in character assassination and community manipulation. She created an entire network of fake social media profiles with names like Concerned Mom 2023, Safety First Dad, and Willowbrook Family to spread coordinated disinformation about my mental health and alleged threats against neighbors. Her masterpiece was convincing Dr. Patricia Hawkins, a local child psychologist who'd never met me, to publish an opinion piece in the county newspaper about boundary dispute psychology and how obsessive property line fixation often indicated underlying antisocial tendencies that posed risks to community safety. Veronica organized a concerned citizens petition demanding the county require psychiatric evaluation for any property owner filing boundary disputes involving more than normal property line disagreements. The petition gathered 127 signatures in 2 days, mostly from people who'd never spoken to me but believed Veronica's carefully crafted narrative about dangerous rural extremists. She convinced Pastor Williams at Millbrook Methodist, a congregation I'd attended for 15 years, to privately suggest that Martha and I might find worship more spiritually nourishing elsewhere until our legal aggressiveness was resolved and we could approach Christian fellowship with proper humility. Her cruelest psychological operation involved staging elaborate property damage throughout Willowbrook, then photographing the evidence for social media prosecution. Broken mailbox posts appeared overnight, followed by posts claiming, "This is what happens when agricultural extremists target innocent families." Mysterious tire ruts damaged carefully maintained lawns, accompanied by captions about intimidation tactics by rural bullies. 3 additional parents complained to the school board that Martha seemed emotionally unstable during library programs and made inappropriate comments about fighting corrupt authority that made their children uncomfortable with her presence. But while Sterling and Veronica escalated their harassment into federal crime territory, they had no idea they were providing evidence that would destroy them both in ways they couldn't imagine. EPA Special Agent Rodriguez was documenting every instance of environmental sabotage, evidence destruction, and witness intimidation for federal prosecution. FBI financial crimes investigators were tracking Sterling's shell company payments to corrupt county officials and his systematic destruction of evidence. Sarah Sage's investigation had connected Sterling's environmental crimes to similar fraud schemes in 4 other states, establishing the criminal pattern federal prosecutors needed for RICO charges that carried potential life sentences. Most importantly, I was no longer fighting this battle alone. 3 more Willowbrook families had quietly contacted Patricia Santos about foundation problems and title insurance issues. 2 county employees had come forward with evidence of Sterling's bribery payments to planning officials. Sterling and Veronica thought they were winning because I'd stopped responding to their provocations visibly. They interpreted my strategic silence as defeat, making them increasingly reckless and confident about their upcoming victory celebration. They had no idea I was about to turn their moment of triumph into the most spectacular public destruction in county history. The week before Sterling's Grand Victory Festival, his desperation reached levels that would have been comical if they weren't so destructive to innocent families caught in his web of fraud and environmental crime. Monday morning brought Sterling's final, most audacious gambit, hiring Harold Briggs, the retired county surveyor, to forge documentation that would correct the public record and retroactively legitimize his fraudulent development. I watched through my grandfather's old binoculars as Sterling met with Harold in the parking lot behind Murphy's Diner, 2 men hunched over paperwork like conspirators planning a bank heist. Their conversation lasted 2 hours, punctuated by Sterling pointing at various landmarks around my property and Harold nodding with the enthusiasm of someone being paid very well for his cooperation. By Thursday, Harold had signed a backdated affidavit swearing that Sterling's original subdivision survey was accurate and professionally conducted according to 2016 industry standards. The document claimed my boundary survey was fundamentally flawed due to GPS calibration errors and improper benchmark utilization by an inexperienced surveyor. Frank Morrison nearly spilled his coffee when I showed him Harold's fabricated statement. Ezra, Harold Briggs has been struggling with early-stage dementia for 3 years. His surveying license was revoked in 2022 after he filed inaccurate reports that cost 2 families their property. Sterling paid a sick old man to lie under oath for him. The forgery was desperate and clumsy, but Sterling filed it with the county clerk as corrected official documentation supporting his property ownership claims throughout Willowbrook Estates. Sterling escalated to hiring what he called professional property protection services. 3 ex-military contractors with tactical gear and attitudes who established a security trailer at Willowbrook's main entrance to monitor suspicious activities and ensure resident safety during ongoing legal disputes. These rent-a-cops followed me to the grocery store in unmarked vehicles, photographed my license plate at the post office, and made elaborate shows of radioing my location whenever I left my property. They were creating the appearance that I posed some kind of genuine threat requiring professional security intervention. The psychological impact on Willowbrook residents was exactly what Sterling intended. Families began believing I was dangerous enough to require armed guards, validating Veronica's months of character assassination. Sterling's final legal maneuver was filing an emergency restraining order to prevent me from accessing disputed property areas until our boundary dispute was properly resolved through appropriate legal channels. He argued that my presence on established HOA common areas constituted criminal trespassing and created imminent safety risks for families with young children. The injunction hearing was conveniently scheduled for the Monday after his victory festival, clearly designed to prevent me from interfering with his celebration while he established adverse possession claims through public use of my property. But Veronica's festival planning revealed just how completely they'd lost touch with reality and legal consequences. She organized the Willowbrook Community Festival with the production values of a political convention, complete with professional catering, a commercial sound system, and a media relations coordinator hired from the state capitol. She invited county commissioners, the mayor, 3 regional television stations, and the editor of the state newspaper to witness Sterling's successful community development achievement. Her media strategy was breathtaking in its delusional audacity. She'd scheduled newspaper interviews about protecting family neighborhoods from agricultural extremism and planned a live-streamed speech about successful public-private partnerships that defeat rural obstruction to progress. The festival would feature children's activities positioned directly on my legally owned property, bouncy houses inflated over my septic field lines, pony rides in areas where my grandfather used to graze cattle, and food trucks parked on gravel that I'd paid to install and maintain for 8 years. Veronica planned permanent installations designed to establish adverse possession claims, a community center foundation that would be poured during the festival, playground equipment that would create established recreational use, and landscaping that would demonstrate community investment and improvement of formerly agricultural land. Sterling announced the festival would launch advanced sales for Willowbrook Phase 2, an additional 96 luxury homes on recently acquired property that he'd already begun marketing to families who believed they were investing in a proven successful community. He was taking deposits and signing construction contracts for houses on land he didn't own, using my property as collateral for loans he had no legal authority to secure. The most revealing moment came during Veronica's final planning meeting, which Sarah Sage recorded using hidden cameras and audio equipment. Veronica actually said, with complete confidence, "Once we complete this festival without any interference, that delusional farmer will be finished politically and legally. No reasonable person will take his boundary claims seriously after we demonstrate community-wide support for our legitimate property ownership." Sterling nodded enthusiastically, adding, "The key is making this celebration look completely normal and family-friendly. Once we have 200 families enjoying themselves on that land, it becomes our land through community acceptance and adverse possession rights." They were planning to steal my property through public relations, believing that media coverage of their thriving community would somehow override federal environmental law, banking regulations, and constitutional property rights. Meanwhile, federal investigators were completing evidence gathering that would destroy Sterling's freedom and Veronica's future in ways they couldn't comprehend. Saturday morning had arrived, and it was time to spring the trap. Saturday dawned with the kind of crystalline winter clarity that makes every detail sharp-edged and unforgettable, as if nature itself wanted perfect lighting for the most spectacular public reckoning in county history. By 10 in the morning, Willowbrook Estates buzzed with festival energy that reminded me of county fairs from my childhood. Except this celebration was built on 8 years of fraud, environmental destruction, and systematic theft of my family's land. Families streamed through the main entrance carrying folding chairs, coolers packed with lunch, and children vibrating with anticipation for bouncy houses and carnival games. The smell of kettle corn and barbecue smoke mixed with diesel exhaust from food trucks, creating an oddly festive atmosphere for what would become a federal crime scene. Kids ran toward inflatable attractions that had been positioned directly over my septic field lines, their laughter echoing across property my grandfather had farmed for 60 years. Pony rides operated in the pasture where my great-grandfather had grazed cattle during the Depression. Food trucks lined up along gravel paths I'd maintained and improved for 8 years without realizing I was subsidizing Sterling's theft. Sterling had positioned his Community Achievement Recognition podium at the exact geographic center of the disputed property line, where my legal ownership cut through Willowbrook's main green space like a surveyor's blade. Professional sound equipment carried his voice across 400 people as he delivered prepared remarks about successful public-private partnerships and protecting family community values from outside interference. County commissioners occupied front-row seats, beaming with the satisfied expressions of politicians celebrating successful constituent services. Mayor Davidson wore his finest suit and practiced his camera-ready smile for 3 regional television crews documenting what everyone believed would be Sterling's greatest professional triumph. State Representative Carol Martinez had positioned herself strategically near the podium, surrounded by campaign photographers ready to capture her association with innovative community development that she planned to feature in her anti-corruption platform ironically. Veronica spotted me approaching through the crowd from 200 yards away. Even at that distance, I could see her face transform from confident satisfaction to pale recognition that something was fundamentally wrong with her perfectly orchestrated celebration. She grabbed Sterling's arm and whispered urgently in his ear. But Sterling was too intoxicated by his own success to feel threatened by one aging farmer carrying a manila folder and walking with the deliberate pace of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. When Sterling saw me approaching the podium through families enjoying his festival, he actually smiled with magnanimous confidence and gestured for me to join him on the elevated platform. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sterling announced into the microphone, his voice booming across the celebration with complete assurance, "we have a very special guest joining our community achievement ceremony today. Ezra Blackwood, our longtime neighbor, has decided to participate in our celebration. Perhaps he'd like to share a few words about our successful partnership and community cooperation." The crowd applauded politely, most attendees having no idea they were witnessing the setup for the most devastating public downfall in regional political history. I climbed the portable steps to the podium with the calm deliberation of someone who'd rehearsed this moment dozens of times in my barn, while General Patton provided moral support. Sterling stepped aside with a generous smile, confident he was about to witness my public surrender and validation of his property claims. "Thank you, Sterling," I said, adjusting the microphone to accommodate my height while scanning the crowd of families who had no idea their community was built on environmental crime and systematic fraud. "I did come here today to share some remarkable discoveries about this beautiful festival location." I unfolded Frank Morrison's certified survey map, its official county seal and professional measurements visible to the front rows and television cameras positioned to capture Sterling's moment of triumph. "This is a legal boundary survey conducted by Frank Morrison, licensed in this state for 30 years and recognized by federal courts as an expert witness in property disputes. According to this official document, filed with the county courthouse and verified by GPS coordinates, every single person currently standing on this grass is trespassing on my private property." The crowd's polite festival murmur shifted to confused whispers as parents began looking around nervously, suddenly uncertain about where they were standing and what that might mean legally. You see, my actual property line, marked here with precise GPS coordinates and confirmed by historical deed records, runs directly underneath those bouncy houses where your children are playing, beneath this podium where we're standing, and across that food truck serving funnel cakes to families who have no idea they're purchasing snacks on someone else's land. I pointed to specific landmarks around the festival, and people actually followed my gestures, beginning to understand with growing alarm that their community celebration was taking place in the middle of someone else's legally owned property. That's when EPA Special Agent Maria Rodriguez stepped forward from the crowd, her federal badge clearly visible, and spoke in a voice trained to command attention and respect in crisis situations. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Special Agent Rodriguez with the Environmental Protection Agency. For the past 12 weeks, federal investigators have been gathering evidence of environmental crimes related to this development." The festival noise died so completely, I could hear individual children asking their parents what was happening and why the grown-ups had stopped talking. "Mr. Sterling Ashford is currently under federal investigation for wetlands destruction, fraudulent surveying, conspiracy to violate environmental protection statutes, and bank fraud involving falsified loan documents. This entire development was constructed on illegally filled federal wetlands without required permits, using survey data that Mr. Ashford knew was false when he submitted it for construction financing." FBI Special Agent David Park approached Sterling with the measured pace of law enforcement officers who've performed this procedure hundreds of times. "Sterling Ashford, you are under arrest for conspiracy, bank fraud, environmental crimes, and violation of federal wetlands protection statutes." The metallic click of handcuffs closing echoed through the festival's sudden silence while 400 families watched their community leader being read his constitutional rights in front of their children's bouncy houses. Veronica actually tried to run, stumbling across the grass in designer heels while Sarah Sage's camera crew intercepted her with questions about her knowledge of Sterling's environmental crimes and fraud conspiracy. Instead of answering, Veronica screamed at the crowd about me being vindictive and destroying innocent families, but her voice was overwhelmed by parents demanding answers about their home's legal status and their investment's security. I stepped back to the microphone for the moment I'd practiced in my barn for 6 weeks. "Justice isn't about revenge," I said, looking directly into the news cameras while families gathered closer to hear what would happen to their homes and their children's future. "It's about making things right for everyone who's been hurt by lies and corruption. I'm donating 10 acres of this property for a permanent community park where your children can play safely while we work together to resolve housing issues fairly and legally. The environmental cleanup will create good construction jobs for people who need them, and every family will be protected from losing their investment because of Sterling's crimes." The applause started hesitantly, then built as people realized I was offering solutions and protection instead of retribution and displacement. Sterling was led away in federal custody past the bouncy houses and cotton candy stands, while families surrounded me asking how we could fix the damage he'd created and protect their children's future. 6 months later, on a warm May morning that smelled of honeysuckle and new beginnings, Willowbrook looked like a completely different place, and I mean that in the most hopeful way possible. Sterling pled guilty to federal conspiracy, environmental crimes, and bank fraud, receiving an 18-year prison sentence that the judge called appropriate consequences for deliberate destruction of protected natural resources motivated by pure financial greed. His personal and business assets were liquidated to fund environmental restoration and provide restitution to the families he'd defrauded. Veronica lost their house to legal fees and moved back to Orange County, but not before being convicted of conspiracy and harassment, receiving 3 years probation and a permanent restraining order preventing her from contacting anyone involved in the case. Last I heard, she was working retail at a shopping center near Anaheim, which seemed like cosmic justice with a sense of humor. The real victory was watching a community heal and grow stronger through adversity that could have destroyed it. 73 homeowners successfully negotiated fair purchase agreements for the land underneath their houses, transforming from unwitting trespassers into legitimate property owners at prices based on actual agricultural land values, rather than Sterling's inflated suburban fantasies. Instead of losing their life savings to fraud, these families gained genuine security and clear legal titles. 25 families whose homes suffered foundation problems, septic failures, or electrical defects received complete remediation funded by Sterling's seized assets. This time, the construction was performed by licensed contractors who actually followed building codes, environmental regulations, and professional standards. The new Willowbrook Homeowners Association operates on democratic principles with transparent finances, environmental protection as a core mission, and bylaws that prevent any single person from wielding dictatorial power over their neighbors' lives. Their first official act was establishing the Willowbrook Environmental Restoration Fund, using settlement money to protect local wetlands, wildlife corridors, and family farms from future development fraud. Martha and I used our portion of the settlement to create the Willowbrook Conservation Scholarship, providing full college funding for rural students studying environmental law, sustainable agriculture, and community development. 3 kids from farming families are now in law school, learning to protect their communities from developers who see rural land as empty space waiting for profitable improvement. The restored wetlands became a certified state wildlife habitat and environmental education center that attracts school groups from 4 counties. Teachers bring students to learn about sustainable development, environmental protection, and the importance of legal integrity in community planning. The delicious irony isn't lost on anyone that Sterling's attempt to destroy natural habitats created something more educationally valuable and environmentally significant than his original suburban development ever could have achieved. What touches my heart most deeply is watching former enemies become genuine neighbors and friends. The annual Community Restoration Festival replaced Sterling's fake celebration with authentic fellowship, featuring local food, environmental education, and collaborative projects that strengthen rather than divide our rural suburban community. General Patton achieved unexpected celebrity status as the unofficial Willowbrook mascot. Children draw pictures of him in art class. Someone created a social media account called Rooster Updates from Willowbrook that has attracted 15,000 followers, and he appears to understand his historical significance in county legal precedent. The legal precedent from our case led to Ezra's Law, state legislation requiring independent boundary verification and environmental impact assessment for all major developments. 3 corrupt county officials resigned under federal investigation, and the new Planning Commission operates with genuine oversight, public transparency, and environmental accountability. Martha received the State Environmental Hero Award for her research contributions and community organizing skills. She's now head librarian and coordinates environmental education programs that attract families from across the region who want their children to understand the connections between legal integrity, environmental protection, and community sustainability. Young environmental lawyers seek internships with Patricia Santos's legal clinic specifically to work on cases involving rural communities threatened by corporate fraud. The clinic has become a regional model for using legal advocacy to protect family farms, natural resources, and working communities from exploitation by wealthy developers. The most meaningful outcome was personal. My relationship with our adult children strengthened through watching us stand up for principles while protecting innocent neighbors who'd been victimized alongside us. They visit more frequently now, bringing grandchildren who love feeding chickens, learning about sustainable farming, and playing in the community park that occupies the exact location where Sterling planned his fraudulent expansion. On quiet evenings, Martha and I sit on our porch listening to children's laughter echo across restored wetlands where migrating waterfowl have returned after 8 years of absence. The sound of genuine community joy is infinitely sweeter than any revenge could ever be. Which brings me to next week's story about justice, corruption, and poetic consequences. A small-town mayor who embezzled $8 million in federal infrastructure funds, but made one crucial mistake. He deposited the money in his wife's account, not knowing she'd been secretly funding his political opponent's campaign for 8 months and documenting every transaction for the FBI. Share your most outrageous HOA horror story in the comments below. Some of these tales of suburban tyranny are absolutely unbelievable, and corrupt officials need to know that ordinary people are watching, documenting, and fighting back. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because these justice stories unfold every day across America, and the only thing that stops bullies and fraudsters is good people who refuse to back down when they know they're right.